Hey guys, I have a book for us today. It's called A Bad Case of the Stripes. My daughter bought this for me and she wanted me to read it with a shout out to her friend Jill. So here we go. Camellia Cream loved lima beans. She never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans and she wanted to fit in. Camellia always worried about what other people thought of her. Today she was fretting even more than usual. It was the first day of school and she couldn't decide what to wear. There were so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits, but none of them seemed quite right. She put on a pretty red dress, looked in the mirror, and then screamed. Her mother ran into the room and she screamed too. "Oh my heavens, you're completely covered with stripes." This was certainly true. Camellia was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camellia's forehead. "Do you feel all right?" she asked. "I feel fine," Camellia answered. "But just look at me." "You get back in bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You're not going to school today." Camellia was relieved. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid of what the other kids would say, and she had no idea what to wear with those stripes. That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine Camellia. "Most extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like that. Are you having any coughing, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching?" "No," Camellia said. "I feel fine." "Well then," Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, "I don't see any reason why we shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's some ointment that should clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to reach me." And off he went. The next day was a disaster. Everyone at school laughed at Camellia. They called her Camellia Crayon, Night of the Living Lollipop. She tried her best to act as if everything was normal, but when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned red, white, and blue, and she broke out in stars. The other kids thought this was great. One yelled out, "Let's see some purple polka dots." Sure enough, Camellia turned all purple polka dotty. Someone else shouted, "Checkerboard!" and a pattern of squares covered her skin. Soon, everyone was calling out different shapes and colors, and poor Camellia was changing faster than you can change channels on a TV. That night, Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cream," he said. "I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camellia home from school. She's too much of a distraction, and I've been getting calls from other parents. They're afraid those stripes might be contagious." Camellia was so embarrassed. She couldn't believe that 2 days ago everyone liked her. Now nobody wanted to be in the same room with her. Her father tried to make her feel better. "Is there anything I can get for you, sweetheart?" he asked. "No, thank you," sighed Camellia. What she really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans, but she had been laughed at enough for one day. Yes, I see," Dr. Bumble mumbled when Mr. Cream phoned him the next day. "I think I'd better bring in the specialist, and we'll be right over." About an hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with 4 people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams. "This is Dr. Group, Dr. Sponge, Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young." The specialists went to work on Camellia. They squeezed and jabbed and tapped and tested. It was very uncomfortable. "Well, it's not the mumps," concluded Dr. Group. "Or the measles," said Dr. Sponge. "Definitely not the chicken pox," said Dr. Cricket. "Or sunburn," said Dr. Young. "Try these," said the specialist. They each handed her a bottle filled with different colored pills. Take one of each before bed, said Dr. Group. Then they filed out the front door, followed by Dr. Bumble. That night, Camellia took her medicine. It was awful. She woke up the next morning. She did feel different, but when she got dressed, her clothes didn't fit right. And she looked in the mirror, and there, staring back at her, was a giant multicolored pill with her face on it. Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Mrs. Cream called. But this time, instead of the specialists, he brought the experts. Dr. Gord and Dr. Mellon were the finest scientific minds in all the land. Once again, Camellia was poked and prodded, looked at and listened to. The expert wrote down lots of numbers. Then they huddled together and whispered. Dr. Gord finally spoke. "It might be a virus," he announced with authority. Suddenly, fuzzy little virus balls appeared all around Camellia. "Or possibly some kind of bacteria," said Mr. Mellon. "Out popped squiggly little bacteria tails. Or it could be a fungus," added Dr. Gord. Instantly, Camellia was covered with different colored fungus blotches. The experts looked at Camellia. Then they looked at each other. We need to go over the numbers back at the lab again," said Dr. Gord. "We'll call you when we know something." But the experts didn't have a clue, much less a cure. By now, the TV news had found out about Camellia. Reporters from every channel were outside her house telling the story of the bizarre case of the incredible changing kid. Soon, a huge crowd had camped out on the front lawn. The Creams were swamped with all kinds of remedies from psychologists, allergists, herbalists, nutritionalists, physics, and an old medicine man, a guru, and even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added to poor Camelia's strange appearance, until it was hard to even recognize her. She had sprouted roots and berries and crystals and feathers and a long furry tail, but nothing had worked. One day, a woman who called herself an environmental therapist claimed she could cure Camellia. "Close your eyes," she said. "Breathe in deeply. Become one with your room." "I wish you hadn't said that," Camellia groaned. Slowly, she started to melt into the walls of her room. Her bed became her mouth. Her nose was the dresser, and two paintings were her eyes. The therapist screamed and ran out of the house. "What are we going to do?" Mrs. Cream cried. "It gets worse and worse," and she began to sob. So can you see her eyes? And here's her mouth is her bed mattress. At that moment, Mrs. Cream heard a quiet little knock on the front door. He opened it, and there stood an old woman, just as plump and as sweet as a strawberry. "Excuse me," she said brightly, "but I think I can help." She went to Camelia's room and looked around. "My goodness," she said with a shake of her head. "Why, what we have here is a bad case of the stripes, one of the worst I've ever seen." She pulled a container of small green beans from her bag. "Here," she said, "this might do the trick." "Are those magic beans?" Mrs. Cream asked. Oh my, no, replied the kind old woman. There's no such thing. These are just plain old lima beans. I bet you'd like some, wouldn't you? She asked Camellia. Camellia wanted a big, heaping plate full of lima beans more than just about anything. But she was still afraid to admit it. Yuck, she said. No one likes lima beans, especially me. Oh dear, the old woman said sadly. I guess I was wrong about you. She put the beans back into her bed and started toward the door. Camellia watched the old woman walk away. Those beans would taste so good. And being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she'd been going through. She finally couldn't stand it. Wait, she cried. Truth is, I really love lima beans. I thought so, the old woman said with a smile. She took a handful of the beans and popped them into Camellia's mouth. Said Camellia. Suddenly, the branches and the feathers and the squiggly tails began to disappear. Then the whole room swirled around. When it stopped, there stood Camellia, and everything was back to normal. I'm cured, she shouted. Yes, said the old woman. I knew the real you was in there somewhere. She patted Camellia on the head. Then she went outside and vanished into the crowd. Afterward, Camellia wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at school said she was weird, but she didn't care a bit. She ate all the lima beans she wanted, and she never got a touch of the stripes again. Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed this story, and Miss Michelle loves you.